Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be telling you how I got 2 9s at GCSE. Now obviously I would never do this video to boast or anything, because what's the point in doing that? Like, no one even cares. But I'm doing this because I just found these videos so useful. I know Eve Bennett made loads and loads of these videos and I just found them just so good, and they just really helped me with my GCSE revision. So I thought I'd make one of my own and just share my own techniques with you. To be honest, these are kind of techniques that you want to use if you don't want to revise really hard. I feel like for these 2 subjects I didn't revise hard, but I just felt like the revision I did do was good quality revision, and it just really helped in the long run, even if it didn't take up a lot of time. There's only a couple of things that you actually need to do in order to get the top grades for these subjects. So in this video I'm going to be talking about both English language and Spanish, but basically all languages in general, because obviously all of the language exams are the same. So I just put the timestamp here for whoever wants to learn about how to get a 9 in languages, because I know not everyone will really care about English language as well. So I did a QA for English language, and I feel like that's probably the most popular exam board. For most questions, I'm going to be honest, I just watched YouTube videos to understand them. In school we didn't really do a lot of English language revision. We did mainly English literature in lessons, so I think that's why when it came to revising for English language I didn't really know what to do, because we literally did nothing in the lessons. So basically I just recommend you watching a guy called Mr. Bruh. You might have heard of him before because he is pretty famous in the GCSE kind of community, but his videos for English language are absolutely amazing. I recommend you watch all of them. I watched all of them the night before my exams because they're not long at all. They're like between 5 and 20 minutes each, so definitely watch them. He's made one on every single question for the papers, because obviously there's only like 5 questions per paper. So please, just after watching this video, go and watch those videos, and you don't even need to watch them until the night before your exam, because honestly you won't remember them for starters. If you watch them now, if it's like February right now and your exams are in May, you won't remember what he says. But just watch it the night before your exam, maybe take some notes if you want to, if that's your thing. But honestly, like, there's not too much you can do for English language because you don't know what's going to crop up. So for certain questions I'd say watch Mr. Bruh. But right now I'm going to tell you what you have to do for the last questions for each paper. For paper 1, the last question is to write a narrative or a description of some kind or something like that, based on a picture or a word or just a little storyline that they give you for a starter. So for my year, we could either write a description about a picture of like a marketplace. I never really got with descriptions, like they were never really my thing. So that's why I was really happy to see that the second choice was to write a narrative about being abandoned. I did spend a bit of time considering doing the description, but then I was just kind of leaning towards the narrative anyway, because that's what just always been my thing. I've always loved writing stories, so I just kind of did that. However, if I were to write description, there are just a couple of things that I'd include, which is what I'm going to tell you right now. Something really important about writing a description is you don't have to just
describe the picture.
I know a couple of people that just described the picture, and to be honest, they didn't really get the results that they wanted. My friend also got a 9 in English language, but she did the description rather than the narrative, and she didn't even write about the market that much. She wrote about a description of a storm that was coming towards a marketplace. So you just have to be imaginative. It doesn't, like, don't just write about each stall in the market. Like, that is boring. I think if I were to write a description, I'd probably write about the senses and probably do a paragraph for each sense. So with the marketplace, I'd probably say something along the lines of like, the smell in the air was thick with goodness. I don't even know. I was terribly at descriptions, which is why I never chose that question. But I would do a paragraph for smell, a paragraph for taste, a paragraph for sight, a paragraph for what you can hear in the marketplace, all of the talking, the foreign talking that you might be able to hear. And it would just be really good if you could do that. I know that's what I definitely do. If description was the only option, I would have gone with that. And I feel like you can apply that to most cases as well. Like if the picture was of a ski slope, you could have written about the senses that you would experience when you're in the ski slope. But really, I'd watch another video on that, because I kind of specialize in narratives because I just always pick them. I always preferred writing stories. Now, I actually know what I got in my story. I got 36 out of 40, which I was really happy with because I never got that high in my mocks. I think the key to the narrative, just like the description, is to think outside the box. Like, honestly, your examiner is going to be marking hundreds of papers every day. They're just going to be bored of seeing the same thing over and over again. The word was abandoned. I swear a million, like so many people would have written about an abandoned child. It's not boring, it's just kind of average. Do you know what? you know what I mean. So like your examiner, he or she is going to be looking for something different. They're going to be looking for something that would just like interest them as an examiner, because a lot of people will be writing the same thing. They'll just feel like they're reading the same thing over and over again, and they'll just be bored. You have to write about something that's different. I heard about someone writing about an abandoned building, and I feel like that's quite outside the box. I mean, I wouldn't have thought about that myself. If you're wondering what I wrote about, my story was a big risk, but I'd say take risks. Like, if you don't take risks, you're not going to get anywhere. Like, you've got to take a risk. Don't be worried about it. You can just forget about it once you've done the exam, and then you'll come to results day and see that good grade and be like, yeah, I'm so happy I took that risk. So I wrote about a person who was abandoned on their date night. I can't really remember exactly what I put. I just remember the whole story was an extended metaphor from the woman turning from an angel into a devil, and it all started when she spilt wine on her white dress, so it was like it stained red, and that was basically my story. She basically got drunk with this wine, and then she basically tore off her white dress. Basically, I wrote about a drunk woman who got naked, and every time I tell people like I wrote about that in my English language GCSE, they're like, what's wrong with you, Lottie? But honestly, you have to think outside the box. The examiner, he or she must have given me 36 because they were interested in my story, even though I don't really know why, because honestly that's such a weird story and I don't know why I wrote that. You can do a lot of practices to kind of train your imagination to think of better storylines than other people. As for techniques, similes and metaphors are good, but they're not really grade 7, 8 or 9 standard. Really, you should be using techniques like not primary school techniques. You should be thinking more about like ambiguous vocabulary or like extended metaphors. I don't really know, but there's probably a whole list online of cool techniques that you could use that no one else would have thought of. Because to be honest, I don't know about your school, but at my school we literally didn't do any English language lessons. It was all English literature for us. It was kind of up to us to do well in English language. I think before going into the exam, maybe write a list of like sophisticated words that you could use that kind of sound impressive, and they're not just like good, they're like amazing. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, write a checklist of all the really good techniques and all the really good vocabulary that you're going to use in your story, and that can also apply to paper 2 as well. Also, this is kind of where I made a mistake, probably where I lost my marks, was that I didn't really plan my story beforehand. I did not know what I was writing about. My pen was just going crazy. But then again, I don't think it's that important to plan, and because if you plan a bit too much, your story just sounds really unnatural, and it just doesn't sound like good. It just sounds too structured and too like primary school. Again, you don't want it to sound like a primary school essay. You want it to sound impressive. So I feel like you should plan your story, but just not too much. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about paper 1. There is probably something I've missed, but I think you should probably watch more videos apart from mine, because I feel a bit weird that your whole GCSE is now in my hands. So maybe watch another video, because obviously I'm not a teacher or anything. I'm literally like a 16-year-old telling you this. Like, these are just my top tips. So paper 2, again, I'd say for the other questions in the paper, go and watch Mr. Bruff, because I just don't want to be sitting here repeating what he says in his videos, because honestly everything that he says in those videos, I'll link them all down below by the way, everything he says are just amazing. Just pay attention to every little detail that he says. So again, I'm going to be talking about the end question of paper 2. So in the end question of paper 2, they give you like a topic to talk about, and you could write, like, they give you options to write like an article on it, or they could ask you to write a letter about it to someone. I'd say before going into this exam, research the techniques that you need. So for example, for a letter, which was mine, I completely did not use the techniques that I was meant to use. I don't actually know what I got in this question, but for a letter, you're meant to write like 2 addresses on top of the page. You're meant to write your address on one of the sides, I can't remember which one, and the person you're writing the letter to, their address should be on the other side. So that's where I went a bit wrong, because I didn't write the addresses at the top of the page like I should have done. To be honest, like, you're not going to lose too many marks for that, but if you are looking to get like the top grades, you do need to like pay attention to the techniques. Just research about how to write a letter and all of the rules that you need to know. You also need to know before you start writing whether you're going to use an informal tone or a formal tone. Also, for this question, you have to think outside the box. So often they'll tell you to argue for or against a problem that's happening maybe in the neighborhood or something. Okay, I'll give an example. So if the question, I don't think they'd ask this question because it's just like political and they wouldn't do that, but if the question was, do you think that Donald Trump should be president, or do you not think Donald Trump should be president? Even even though we know a lot of people would not want Donald Trump to be president, so they'd argue against him, I'd say argue for him. Even if you disagree with that yourself, like obviously most people disagree with that, I'd say argue for him, because then the examiner, when they're marking all these against Donald Trump and against Donald Trump, they'll be like, oh, someone wanted Donald Trump to be president. They'll be interested in your letter or article. That was a really bad example, but I'm sure you know what I mean. Like, you just have to think outside the box again. So that's all of my advice for English language. It all worked for me. I didn't do that much revision for English language. In fact, I kind of revised it all the night before, but it worked. So do it. Like, it's fine. Like, to be honest, English language is one of those GCSEs you can't really revise for. Like, it is what it is. Like, you don't know what's going to come up in the exam. Like, don't know what's going to come up. Like, it could be anything in the world. Okay, so now that brings me on to the languages part of the video. I'm sure this applies to all languages. I got a 9 in my Spanish GCSE and an 8 in my French GCSE, so A stars all round basically. And although an 8 isn't as impressive, I always just found French a little bit harder than Spanish. I don't know if it was my teacher. It probably wasn't my teacher because both my teachers were amazing, but I don't know, I just always found French a bit harder. It might just be a harder language in general. All these techniques will apply to French, Spanish, German, or any other language GCSE. So I'm going to do this in sections. I'm going to do speaking, reading, writing and listening, but overall I just say learn as much vocabulary as you can. I used Quizlet all year round. For all my little tests I revised the vocabulary, but don't worry if you haven't been learning vocabulary all year round, because honestly once you start learning it before the exam it comes back to you really quickly. Okay, so for the speaking exam I actually memorized all of the paragraphs that I wrote for my general conversation. I know quite a few schools are against just memorizing, and quite a lot of schools actually want you to just make it up on the spot, but personally I disagree with that. I think that as long as you know what you're saying, so you're not just babbling words that you don't actually know what you're saying, as long as you understand what you're saying within your speaking questions, I think it's fine to just memorize them, because you just sound a lot more fluent than if you were just making it up on the spot. It's especially important to learn your chosen theme. So you choose a theme and those questions in that theme will definitely be asked to you in your exam. Themes that you don't choose, they might not be asked to you. You might not be asked those questions, but I think you should still memorize them, because even if you memorize questions that aren't in your chosen theme, like they're still going to help you in your photo card, and they're still going to just help you all round. Even in the writing exam you can write your general conversation question basically, because you're not going to get the same examiner for your speaking and writing. Go ahead, just learn all of those paragraphs. It might take quite a bit of time. It definitely took me a couple of days to learn all of my paragraphs. I think I had about 60 to learn in total, because I had 30 for French and 30 for Spanish. But honestly, once you get into the flow of memorizing those paragraphs, it's quite easy to just learn them all. Also, before learning your paragraphs, I'd get your teacher to mark them all, just in case there's some that she's missed or he's missed. If your teacher hasn't marked some of them, you could be learning the incorrect Spanish or French or German. Also, obviously, I'd say do practice role plays and photo cards. Practice your general conversation questions by, instead of just reading the question and saying your paragraph, I'd say play your question out loud on Quizlet, because there's a setting on Quizlet where you can play the question out loud, so you're not reading it, because that's how it's going to be in the exam. In the exam you might not necessarily see your teacher, like the page that your teacher's reading off, that you'll just have to hear them and say your question from what they're saying. So you just have to like familiarize yourself with how the question sounds. On Quizlet you can also play like just singular words out loud. I'd recommend doing that as well, just so that you can like know that you're pronouncing the words correctly. So listening was always my weak point. Literally my French listening, I think that's what brought me down to an 8, because I did not know what was going on, honestly. I'm not the best person to give advice for listening, but I know myself that I could have done a lot more revision to get my listening up to scratch. So honestly, I just say do lots and lots and lots and lots of practice. And in your practices, don't do what I did and don't cheat. In my practices, I always used to listen to things 3 or 4 times when you're only meant to listen to them twice. So don't cheat, boys and girls, because I cheated and it didn't really help me in the long run. So when you're practicing your listenings, just listen to them twice. Even if you don't get the answer, only listen to them twice, because it's just not a good habit to get into when you're listening to them 3 or 4 times, because you don't get that in the exam. So I don't have a lot to say for reading other than learn vocabulary. I did read a couple of children's books and that helped me a lot. I remember I read the start of Harry Potter. I didn't finish it, but I started reading Harry Harry Potter in Spanish, and you know, just reading a couple of pages of that improved my vocabulary so much. There's also loads of practices in textbooks and things like that. Actually, I will show you which textbooks I used. Actually, well, I got rid of all of my GCSE revision. I don't know, I'll put some textbooks on the screen that I used for French and Spanish because I really recommend these. They're not too expensive. On Amazon they were only like £2 some of them, so I'd say get your hands on some of them if you're really serious about getting a 9 in your language. So lastly, writing. My writing, I think it was probably one of my best exams out of all of my GCSEs was my Spanish writing. However, I forgot the word for today, and obviously today is a really simple word, and I think that's where I kind of messed up. I started learning all of this complicated vocabulary and I kind of forgot about the simple ones that I had to learn. So I'd say practice a lot of translations. That's where I went wrong as well. I wish I practiced a lot more translations, and also I'd say practice really difficult translations, because in your GCSE, like, the translation, it isn't difficult, it's actually really simple compared to the ones that we did in lessons. But I'd still say practice translations that are way more difficult than what you're going to get in the exam, because then when it comes to the exam, it's a really nice surprise when the question's not too hard. For the actual like writing exam, I'd say memorize a checklist of about, I think there were like 21 things on my checklist that I had to learn, and don't just learn like opinions, justifications, like include things like idioms in your writing, because that just shows you've got like a wider understanding of the actual language, because like idioms just, they bring your mark up so much. Like, don't just include the boring techniques like past, present, future. Like, actually, I mean this in the 150, like you don't have to worry about this in the 90 word, but in the 150 words, include loads and loads of techniques. You shouldn't have a single sentence where you don't use an impressive techniques, whether that's just like a negative expression. Like, you should still definitely use techniques in every single sentence in your 150 words. As for your 90 word, I don't know why I'm going through this paper backwards, but for your 90 word, you only need to include specific things. There are 4 bullet points in your 90 words, and I think you should only do a paragraph per bullet point, and only about like 2 or 3 sentences per paragraph, because really your 90 word, you should only spend about 10 to 15 minutes on it, because you don't need it to be very impressive. All you need to include in your 90 word is an opinion and a justification, or a couple of opinions, and then you should also include the past tense, the present tense, and the future tense. You don't need to worry about it sounding impressive, because really it doesn't matter. It's only a small segment of your whole language GCSE. And also, the examiner isn't looking for like all those impressive techniques. They just want you to answer the question, and that's all that's important in 90 word. Just answer the question really well. For your 150 word, do not be afraid to go over the word limit. My teacher talked with people who are examiners, and they say that it doesn't matter if you go over 150 words. Examiners shouldn't mark you down on that, because that just shows that you can say a lot. Obviously don't like ramble on and just be like talking without it making any sense at all, because that's not good. But it doesn't matter if you write about 200 words, because they're just not going to mark you down on that, because that would just be so bad, because that's not marking you on your Spanish ability, it's marking you on your like ability to count words. So don't worry about going over 150 words at all. So that is my whole video on how I got 9s in my English language and languages GCSE. I got an 8 in my French, but I was 6 marks off a 9, so whatever. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you want any more videos on these kind of things. In my GCSEs, I got 5 7s, 2 8s and 2 9s. I got an 8 in French and drama, which is still technically A stars. So let me know if you want to see a video on how I got an 8 in drama, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Okay, bye. Woo! Oops.